The dying light of day painted the Arizona desert in hues of amber and crimson as Bethany Porter clutched her newborn daughter to her chest. The wagon wheels beneath her grinding to a halt outside the town she once called home. The year was 1876, and she had nowhere left to go after her husband's family had cast her out, all for the sin of bearing a girl child when the Porter name demanded a son. "You won't last a week out there," her father-in-law had sneered as he tossed her meager belongings into the wagon. "No woman survives the territories alone, especially not with a squalling girl child." Bethany's arms tightened protectively around her daughter, little Rose, just 6 weeks old and innocent to the cruelty of the world she'd been born into. Her husband Jacob had been dead 3 months now, taken by fever before he ever saw his child. And when Rose emerged wailing and decidedly female, the Porter patriarch made his decision swiftly. The small frontier town of Copper Creek loomed ahead, its dusty main street barely visible in the fading light. Bethany had only passing knowledge of the place, a trading post where ranchers and miners gathered, where a desperate woman might find work enough to feed herself and her child. "We'll make it," she whispered to Rose, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "We have to." The horse pulling her wagon was nearly spent, having traveled 40 miles through unforgiving terrain with minimal rest. Bethany herself had gone without proper sleep for days, constantly vigilant against the dangers of the open trail bandits, wildlife, and the ever-present threat of dehydration under the merciless desert sun. As she guided the wagon down the main street, eyes tracked her progress from saloon doorways and behind dusty windows. A lone woman with a baby was a rare sight in these parts, and Bethany felt each stare like a physical weight upon her shoulders. She pulled up outside what appeared to be a boarding house, a weathered 2-story structure with a sign swinging gently in the evening breeze. The last of her coins would barely cover a night's stay, but she had no choice. Tomorrow she would find work somehow. Clutching Rose tightly against her chest, Bethany climbed down from the wagon, her legs nearly buckling beneath her from exhaustion. She was 22, widowed, and alone in a town where she knew not a soul. The boarding house proprietress, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Holloway, regarded Bethany with suspicious eyes as she entered. "I need a room," Bethany said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Just for tonight until I can find proper arrangements." Mrs. Holloway's gaze flicked to the infant. "No crying at night. My boarders are working men who need their sleep." "She's a good baby," Bethany assured her, though Rose had begun to fuss against her shoulder. "Please, we have nowhere else." Something in Mrs. Holloway's expression softened marginally. $2, and you'll need to be out by noon tomorrow." Bethany counted out nearly the last of her money, her heart sinking as she realized she'd have nothing left for food come morning. But shelter was the priority now. The room was small, with a narrow bed and a washstand that had seen better days. Bethany settled Rose on the bed, surrounded by what few blankets she had, and allowed herself a moment of despair. Her milk was dwindling from stress and poor nutrition. If she couldn't feed her daughter soon. A knock at her door startled her from her dark thoughts. Mrs. Holloway stood there, holding a tray with a bowl of stew and a hunk of bread. "Can't have a nursing mother starving under my roof," the older woman said gruffly. "Bad for business if word gets around." Bethany's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You can start by telling me your story over breakfast. I might know of work for capable hands." With that, Mrs. Holloway departed, leaving Bethany with her first hot meal in days. As night fell over Copper Creek, Bethany fed her daughter and ate her stew, watching the stars appear through the small window of her rented room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight they were safe. It would have to be enough. Morning came too quickly. Bethany was awakened by Rose's hungry cries just as dawn broke over the mountains. After nursing her daughter as best she could, she made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Holloway already bustling around the kitchen. "Sit," the older woman commanded, placing a plate of eggs and biscuits before her. "Can't send you out empty-handed." Over breakfast, Bethany shared her story, her marriage to Jacob Porter, his untimely death, and her subsequent expulsion from the family ranch when she delivered a daughter, instead of the son her father-in-law had demanded to carry on the Porter name. Mrs. Holloway's face darkened with each word. "Some men don't deserve the air they breathe," she muttered. "But that doesn't solve your problem. Can you cook, clean, sew?" "All of those," Bethany replied eagerly. "I managed a large household at the Porter Ranch." "I can do laundry, preserve foods, tend gardens," Mrs. Holloway nodded. "The saloon needs a cook. Owner's wife used to do it, but she's taken ill. Pays not much, but there's a small room off the kitchen where you and the baby could stay." Bethany's heart sank. A saloon was no place for a woman with a reputation to protect, much less a baby. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and she was most certainly begging. "I'll take it," she said firmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." An hour later, Bethany stood in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon, Rose bundled against her chest as she assessed the chaotic kitchen. The owner, Mr. Daniels, seemed relieved to have found help so quickly. "Men get mean when they're hungry," he said matter-of-factly. "You keep their bellies full, I'll keep them from bothering you. The room's through there." He pointed to a door beside the pantry. "It ain't much, but it's yours as long as you're working here." The room was indeed small, barely space for a cot and a makeshift cradle, but it offered privacy and safety. Bethany set to work immediately, organizing the kitchen and preparing the day's meals. By noon, the saloon was filled with miners and cowboys seeking sustenance before returning to their labors. Days turned into weeks as Bethany established a routine. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, used the midday lull to care for Rose and wash laundry, then worked through the evening rush before collapsing into her cot at night. The work was exhausting, but it put food in their mouths and a roof over their heads. Rose grew stronger each day, her dark curls and bright eyes reminiscent of her father. Word spread through Copper Creek about the widow Porter and her infant daughter. Some looked upon her with pity, others with disdain for working in a saloon, but none offered real assistance. Bethany learned to ignore the whispers and focus on survival. It was a Tuesday in late September when he first walked through the door of the Silver Dollar. Elijah Xavier stood 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe as he removed his hat upon entering. His face was weathered from years under the desert sun, but his eyes were the clearest blue Bethany had ever seen. He couldn't have been more than 30, though the life of a cowboy aged a man prematurely. "Afternoon," he nodded to Mr. Daniels before taking a seat at a corner table. His spurs jingled softly as he walked, and Bethany noticed the calluses on his hands when he placed them on the tabletop, a working man's hands. "New in town?" she heard Mr. Daniels ask as she worked in the kitchen, ear tuned to the conversation through the open doorway. "Passing through," the stranger replied, his voice deep and steady. "Looking for work with one of the cattle outfits nearby. Heard the Diamond T might be hiring." Bethany carried a plate of stew to his table, keeping her eyes downcast as was her custom with male patrons. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked softly. Elijah Xavier looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Something passed between them, recognition of a sort, though they'd never met before. He cleared his throat. "No, madam, this looks fine, thank you kindly." She nodded and turned to leave when Rose began crying from the back room. Bethany froze, aware of the saloon owner's strict rules about keeping her daughter hidden from patrons. But the crying intensified, and maternal instinct overrode caution. "Excuse me," she murmured, hurrying to the back room where Rose lay in her makeshift cradle, face red with distress. Bethany scooped her up, checking quickly for fever or other signs of illness, but found only a soaked cloth diaper. Relief flooded her as she set about changing her daughter, murmuring soothing words. "She has your eyes." The deep voice startled her, and Bethany whirled to find the cowboy Elijah standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, backing away. "I heard the crying and thought—" "Well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I shouldn't have intruded." Bethany clutched Rose protectively. "Mr. Daniels doesn't like patrons back here. I'll be on my way then." But he hesitated, eyes lingering on Rose. "How old?" "4 months," Bethany answered cautiously. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Beautiful child. Good day, madam." And then he was gone, boots echoing across the wooden floor as he returned to the main room. Bethany expected never to see him again. Copper Creek saw many drifters passing through, but the next day, Elijah Xavier returned for the midday meal. And the next. By the end of the week, he had become a regular, always choosing the same corner table, always polite but reserved. On the 7th day, he arrived with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For the little one," he said quietly as he placed it on her tray. "I notice she doesn't have much in the way of toys." Stunned, Bethany took the package back to her room. Inside was a carefully carved wooden rattle, smooth and polished, with tiny flowers etched into the handle. Why would he? She whispered to herself, turning the beautiful object in her hands. Such kindness from a stranger was unfamiliar and somewhat frightening. Men didn't give gifts without expecting something in return. That was a lesson she'd learned early in life. When she emerged to thank him, Elijah was gone, his meal half-eaten, payment left beneath his plate. 2 days later, he appeared at the kitchen door rather than the saloon entrance, catching Bethany as she hung laundry in the small yard behind the building. "Miss Porter," he said, removing his hat. "I was hoping to speak with you." Bethany stiffened. "If this is about the gift, it's about a job," he interrupted gently. "I've taken work at the Diamond Tea Ranch about 3 miles outside town. The owner, Mr. Thompson, mentioned they're looking for someone to cook for the ranch hands. The pay's better than here, and there's a cabin small but private. You and your daughter would have your own place." Bethany's hand stilled on the wet shirt she was hanging. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Elijah shifted, suddenly uncomfortable under her direct gaze. "No one should have to raise a child in the back room of a saloon. It's not fitting." Pride flared in Bethany's chest. "We're surviving. You deserve more than survival." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Both of you do." Bethany turned away, unable to face the sincerity in his expression. "And what would Mr. Thompson think of hiring a woman with a baby? He's a family man himself, has 5 daughters. A smile touched Elijah's lips. "I told him about your situation. He said any woman strong enough to do what you're doing would be welcome at his table." Hope, dangerous, fragile hope, bloomed in Bethany's chest. "When would he want me to start?" "Whenever you're ready. I can take you out there tomorrow if you like." She nodded slowly. "I should speak with Mr. Daniels first." "Already did," Elijah admitted. "He wasn't happy to lose you, but he understood. Said you were too good for this place anyhow." The next morning, Bethany found herself in Elijah's wagon, Rose secure in her arms, their few belongings packed in a single trunk behind them. The Diamond Tea spread out before them as they crested a hill, a sprawling ranch with grazing cattle dotting the landscape, and a large main house, surrounded by several smaller cabins. Timothy Thompson proved to be exactly as Elijah had described, a boisterous, kind-hearted rancher with a deep respect for hard work and family. His wife, Martha, took to Bethany immediately, cooing over Rose while showing them to their cabin. "It's not much," Martha said apologetically, "but we've stocked it with the essentials. The ranch hands eat in the cookhouse, but you're welcome at our table anytime." The cabin was simple, one room with a small stove, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a hand-hewn cradle that Martha explained had held each of her 5 daughters in turn. "Mr. Xavier made sure it was ready for your little one," she added with a knowing smile that made Bethany blush. Life at the Diamond Tea settled into a rhythm far more agreeable than the saloon. Bethany rose with the sun to prepare breakfast for the dozen ranch hands, then had midday to tend to Rose and her own chores before preparing the evening meal. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since Jacob's death, she felt something akin to security. Elijah kept his distance, professional and polite when their paths crossed, which happened with increasing frequency as autumn deepened toward winter. He taught the younger hands, mended fences, and sometimes rode with the cattle, but always returned to the ranch house each evening. Bethany found herself watching for him, anticipating his quiet evening, Miss Porter, as he removed his hat before dinner. Sometimes he would bring small treasures for Rose, a colorful stone, a feather from a blue jay, or wildflowers that the baby would grasp with chubby fingers while gurgling happily. On a crisp November evening, Bethany was returning to her cabin after serving dinner when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly. A rider galloped into the yard, his horse lathered and heaving. "Raiders hit the Martin place," he called out as ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse. "Took everything they had and burned them out, sheriffs forming a posse." Timothy Thompson strode from the main house, rifle in hand. "How many men?" "6, maybe 7, headed east toward the pass." Elijah appeared at Thompson's side, already buckling on his gunbelt. "We'll need at least 8 men to go after them safely." Thompson nodded. "Take who you need, and be careful these aren't ordinary bandits if they're burning homesteads." Bethany watched from her doorway as Elijah and 5 other men mounted up and rode out, fear clutching at her heart. She'd heard stories of such posses returning with men draped over their saddles, lives cut short by outlaw bullets. She didn't sleep that night, keeping vigil by her window while Rose slumbered peacefully in her cradle. The posse returned shortly before dawn, their expressions grim but victorious. Elijah dismounted slowly, favoring his left side, and Bethany's breath caught when she saw the bloodstain spreading across his shirt. Before she could think better of it, she was rushing across the yard, Rose left sleeping in her cradle. "You're hurt," she said, reaching him just as he stumbled slightly against his horse. "It's nothing," he murmured, though his face was pale beneath his tan. "Bullet grazed me is all." "Inside," she commanded, taking his arm. "Now." To her surprise, he complied without argument, allowing her to lead him to her cabin. Once inside, she sat him at her table and quickly gathered clean cloths, a basin of water, and the small medical kit Martha had provided for emergencies. "Shirt off," she instructed, all embarrassment forgotten in the face of his injury. Elijah complied with a grimace, revealing a well-muscled torso marred by a bleeding furrow across his ribs. Bethany worked efficiently, cleaning the wound while he sat in stoic silence. "You could have been killed," she said finally, her voice tight with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "It's part of the territory," he replied softly. "We got them, though. They won't be troubling any more homesteaders." Bethany's hands trembled slightly as she bandaged his side. "And what about Rose? What if you hadn't come back?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning neither had spoken aloud. "Bethany," he said, using her given name for the first time. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, finding them intent and serious. "I would always come back. As long as you and Rose are here, I would find my way back." The simple declaration stole her breath. For long moments they remained frozen, his hand covering hers where it rested against his bandaged side. A soft cry from the cradle broke the spell. Rose was awakening, hungry and demanding attention. Bethany pulled away reluctantly. "You should rest," she said, moving to tend to her daughter. "The wound isn't deep, but you've lost blood." Elijah stood carefully, retrieving his shirt. "Thank you for your care, Miss Porter." He paused at the door, watching as she lifted Rose from the cradle. "She's growing so fast," he observed, a smile softening his features. "Strong like her mother." After he left, Bethany sat nursing Rose, her mind tumbling with confusion and hope and fear. Jacob had been gone barely a year. Was it disloyal to feel this tightening in her chest whenever Elijah was near? And what of Rose? Would she ever accept another man as a father figure? The weeks that followed brought bitter cold to the territory, keeping the ranch hands close to home as blizzards swept across the plains. Christmas approached, and Martha Thompson insisted on a proper celebration, enlisting Bethany's help in preparing a feast for the entire ranch on Christmas Eve. After the main festivities had concluded, Bethany returned to her cabin to find a small package on her doorstep. Inside was a silver locket containing two tiny portraits, one of Bethany and one of Rose that she hadn't even known were being created. A note in Elijah's neat hand read, "So she'll always know her mother's face, and you'll always have her close to your heart." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved Bethany to tears. No one, not even Jacob, had ever considered her feelings so carefully. She fastened the locket around her neck, resolving to thank Elijah properly in the morning, but Christmas Day brought unexpected visitors. As the ranch gathered for dinner, a wagon approached through the freshly broken trail in the snow. Bethany was helping Martha in the kitchen when she heard Thompson call out in greeting to the newcomers. "Welcome to Diamond Tea. Come in and warm yourselves." Curious, Bethany moved to the window, freezing when she recognized the imposing figure of Gerald Porter, her father-in-law, climbing down from the wagon. Behind him was her sister-in-law, Margaret, Jacob's older sister, who had never hidden her disdain for Bethany. "I'm looking for my daughter-in-law," Gerald's voice boomed through the house. "Been tracking her since she left our territory." Bethany clutched the counter for support. "Why is he here?" she whispered to herself. "Why now?" Martha touched her arm gently. "Who is it, dear?" "My husband's father," Bethany managed. "He cast me out when Rose was born, said a girl child was worthless to the Porter name." Martha's expression hardened. "Well, he won't find any welcome here with that attitude." But Gerald Porter had already spotted Bethany through the doorway. "There you are," he said, striding toward her. "Time to come home, girl. You've made your point." Bethany stepped back, instinctively moving toward where Rose sat in a makeshift high chair. "I have no home with you, Mr. Porter. You made that quite clear." Gerald's face reddened. "Don't be difficult. The ranch needs a woman's touch, and the boy needs his family." "Boy," Bethany repeated, confused. Margaret stepped forward. "Father's had a change of heart since you left. He's willing to overlook the girl child if you return and fulfill your duties as Jacob's widow." Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. Gerald Porter hadn't tracked her down out of remorse or familial feeling. He needed someone to cook, clean, and maintain his household now that the winter had set in. Her role was to be servant, not family. "No," Bethany said firmly, lifting Rose from her chair. "My daughter and I are staying right here." Gerald's expression darkened dangerously. That child belongs with her father's family. You have no right to keep her from us." "I have every right," Bethany countered, her voice growing stronger. "You disowned her the moment she was born female. You have no claim on her now." "We'll see what the territorial judge has to say about that," Gerald threatened. "A saloon woman isn't fit to raise a Porter. She doesn't work in a saloon anymore." Elijah's quiet voice came from the doorway, where he stood watching the confrontation with dangerous calm. "And the child's name is Rose Porter, not Girl. She has a name, an identity, and a mother who would die protecting her." Gerald turned, sizing up the cowboy with evident disdain. "This doesn't concern you, boy. When you threaten a woman and child under Diamond T protection, it concerns all of us," Timothy Thompson interjected, moving to stand beside Elijah. The room had grown silent, the festive atmosphere shattered by the confrontation. Rose, sensing the tension, began to whimper in Bethany's arms. "We're her blood kin," Gerald insisted. "We have rights." "Rights you forfeited when you cast them out to die in the desert," Elijah replied, his tone deceptively mild though his eyes had turned to ice. "Miss Porter has built a new life here. She and her daughter are respected, valued members of this community." Martha Thompson moved protectively to Bethany's side. "I think you should leave, Mr. Porter. This is Christmas Day and you're disturbing our celebration." Gerald's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he spat, looking directly at Bethany. "I'll be back with the law." "You do that," Thompson said evenly. "The judge is a personal friend." "I'd be happy to tell him how you abandoned your son's widow and infant granddaughter to the elements because she wasn't born male." The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Even in the territories, such callous disregard for family would not be viewed favorably by any court. After a tense moment, Gerald nodded curtly to Margaret, and they departed without another word, the door slamming behind them with finality. Bethany's legs gave way, and she sank into a chair, clutching Rose tightly against her chest. The room exploded into concerned voices, but it was Elijah who knelt before her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, though tears threatened. "I was a fool to think they'd never find me." "They can't hurt you here," he assured her. "We won't let them." The "we" warmed her more than any fire could have. In that moment, looking around at the concerned faces of the Thompson family and the ranch hands who had become like extended family, Bethany realized she had found something she'd never truly had before: belonging. The remainder of the winter passed without further incident from the Porters, though Bethany lived with the constant fear of their return. Elijah took to checking on her cabin each evening before retiring to the bunkhouse, and Rose grew increasingly attached to the quiet cowboy who brought her small gifts and spoke to her, as though she understood every word. As spring approached, Bethany found herself watching the horizon more frequently, aware that the changing seasons would bring cattle drives and the possibility that Elijah might move on, as cowboys often did. The thought left an emptiness in her chest that she couldn't ignore. On a mild March evening, she sat on the small porch of her cabin, Rose playing on a blanket at her feet when Elijah approached, hat in hand as always. "Evening, Miss Porter," he greeted her, though his usual easy manner seemed strained. "May I speak with you a moment?" Her heart sank. This would be his announcement that he was leaving with the spring drive. She steeled herself against the pain, determined to wish him well. "Of course," she replied, gesturing to the second chair on the porch. He sat, but seemed unable to find the words he wanted, his hat turning endlessly in his calloused hands. "You're leaving," she said finally, breaking the silence. "For the cattle drive." Surprise crossed his features. "No, he took a breath. "Mr. Thompson has offered me the position of foreman. He's getting older, says he needs someone he trusts to oversee more of the day-to-day operations. Relief flooded through Bethany. That's wonderful news. You deserve it. It means I'll be staying, he continued. Permanently. And I'll be moving into the foreman's house. It's on the north side of the property. Bigger than my cabin now. 2 bedrooms, actually. He fell silent again, and Bethany waited, uncertain where this was leading. Elijah cleared his throat. Bethany, I've grown very fond of you and Rose these past months. Her breath caught in her throat. I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed, and I would never presume to replace him in your heart, he hurried on. But I've come to care for you both more than I thought possible. Rose chose that moment to crawl toward him, pulling herself up on his knee with determined little hands. Elijah smiled down at her, and she rewarded him with a gummy grin that showcased her 2 new teeth. She likes you, Bethany said softly. The feeling is mutual. He looked up, his blue eyes serious. I know what it's like to be cast aside for something you can't control. My father sent me away at 15 because I wasn't the farmer he wanted me to be. Said I was too soft-hearted for the hard decisions farming requires. Understanding dawned. That's why you helped us, he nodded. At first, maybe. But then I got to know you, your strength, your kindness, your determination to give Rose a better life than what was offered. He hesitated before continuing. I've never met anyone like you, Bethany Porter. And I'd consider it the greatest blessing if you would consider becoming Bethany Xavier instead. The proposal, so simply stated, left her speechless. Rose babbled happily, oblivious to the momentous question hanging in the air. I don't have much to offer, Elijah continued, mistaking her silence for hesitation. The foreman's house, a steady wage, my promise to always protect and provide for you both. I know it's not yes, Bethany interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Elijah. His expression transformed, hope blooming across his features. You're certain? I don't want you to feel obligated because of what I did. She silenced him by reaching across to take his hand. I'm saying yes because you saw value in us when others saw only burden. Because you've never once made me feel less for needing help. Because Rose lights up when you enter a room. She took a deep breath. And because I've fallen in love with you, though I was afraid to admit it even to myself. Elijah's smile was radiant as he lifted Rose into his arms, then extended his hand to Bethany. She took it, and he pulled her gently to his side. When I first saw you with her, he said, looking down at Rose, who was contentedly playing with his shirt button, I thought how any man could reject this child was beyond comprehension. He met Bethany's gaze, his eyes filled with emotion. She was cast away for bearing a girl, but I want you to know then, and now you've given me heaven. The words, so sincere and heartfelt, brought tears to Bethany's eyes. Elijah gently wiped them away with his thumb before leaning in to place a tender kiss on her lips there first. They were married 2 weeks later in the Thompsons' front parlor, with Rose as their only attendant, perched happily on Martha's hip. Timothy Thompson stood as witness, and the entire ranch gathered to celebrate the union of the young family. As spring bloomed into summer, Bethany, Elijah, and Rose settled into the foreman's house, turning it into a true home filled with laughter and love. Elijah proved to be a natural father, endlessly patient with Rose's growing independence and boundless energy. Bethany flourished under his steady affection, her confidence growing as she realized this love was built on mutual respect rather than obligation or necessity. In August, a letter arrived from the Porter Ranch. Margaret had written to inform Bethany that Gerald had suffered a stroke and was asking for forgiveness in his final days. The letter included an offer of financial support for Rose, a college fund, perhaps when she was of age. What will you do? Elijah asked as they sat on their porch that evening, Rose sleeping peacefully inside. Bethany considered the question carefully. "I'll write back. Not for my sake, but for Rose's. She should know her father's family, even from a distance. When she's older, she can decide for herself what relationship she wants with them." Elijah nodded, understanding as always. "You're a better person than most would be in your place." "I learned forgiveness from watching you," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Your compassion changed our lives." He kissed the top of her head. "You changed mine as well. I was just drifting until I found you and Rose." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, speaking of their hopes for the future, perhaps more children, a small piece of land of their own someday, Rose's education. Dreams that once seemed impossible now lay within reach. "You ever regret it?" Bethany asked suddenly. "Taking on another man's child, a ready-made family?" Elijah turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Not for a single moment. Rose may not have my blood, but she has my heart completely. As do you." He placed his hand gently over her abdomen, where the first signs of new life were beginning to show. "This one will have my name from birth, but he or she will never be loved more than Rose." Tears of gratitude filled Bethany's eyes as she covered his hand with her own. "Our family wasn't formed in the usual way," she acknowledged, "but it's stronger for having been chosen rather than merely born into." As stars appeared in the desert sky above them, Bethany Porter Xavier marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from desperation to fulfillment, from rejection to acceptance, from merely surviving to truly living. What had begun as a desperate flight into the unknown had become a journey home, not to a place, but to the people who made life worth living. In the wild, untamed West, where so many sought fortune or fame, Bethany and Elijah had found something far more precious: a love built on compassion, strengthened through adversity, and destined to endure.